Hello again and welcome back to our course on Excel 2013 Advanced. In the last couple of sections we've been looking at date and time functions, and in particular at how dates and times are both stored and manipulated. In this section all I'm going to do is to set you quite a tricky little exercise to do, and then at the end of the section I've got a couple of other things about Excel 2013 and dates and times just to quickly point out. The exercise I'm going to set you to do relates to the sort of retirement planner that we made earlier on, and the status of it so far is shown here as example 4. Now I can guarantee that this will be a little bit more of a challenge for you. I'm going to save this particular retirement planner that we looked at earlier on as example 4. Now let me just remind you what we said in this particular example. The future value of a retirement pot is there. It's calculated using the FV function. It uses the interest rate in C4, and it uses the difference between somebody's retirement age and their age now, C3 minus C2 times 12 for the number of months. And they're making a monthly payment, in this case $200 a month, a present value, so a starting value of $10,000, what's in the pot at the end of the period. Now what I want you to change in this example 4, as I will save it, is this. I don't want you to put age now, I want you to put date of birth. Their retirement age, yes, that'll be in this case say 55 or 60 or whatever. And what you're going to need to work out is how many months there are between now or today and the date of their retirement. Now to work out the date of their retirement you'll be looking at their date of birth and their required retirement age to work out what the retirement date will be, and then to work out how many months you're going to be looking at the difference between their retirement date and the date today. So it's really quite a complicated little calculation. One thing you can do, if it helps, is to use one or two little cells elsewhere on the sheet. You can even hide the cells if you want as sort of intermediate cells to do your working out as you go along, but that's the basic idea. Now my answer to that is example 5. I'd just like to remind you of what I said a minute or two ago, and that is that don't worry too much about getting the month numbers exactly right. Your month numbers may be one out because we've got one other factor to build into this that we're going to look at later on in the course. So you can purely do the month calculation in the way that I showed you earlier in this section. So put in date of birth instead of age now, and from that work out how many months the person has got until their selected retirement age, calculate the future value of their retirement fund, and example 4 is what you can see now. I'm going to save that as example 4, and my answer to that is example 5. Now I'd really like you to work all of that out yourselves without any further help from me, so you might want to shut your eyes for the next few seconds because I'm just going to show you my answer. I'm not going to show you the formula I've used, but I am going to show you the steps in terms of the intermediate calculations. I mentioned just now that you could maybe use some hidden fields. Well, I've used some visible fields here to make it a little bit easier for you to investigate my answer when you come to look at it. So what I've done is I've put the date today on the sheet, C2. Then I've put the person's date of birth, their retirement age, and calculated their retirement date. Then I've calculated how many months from today to their date of retirement, and then on the basis of that I've calculated the value of their pension pot. So hopefully you can hide some of those, maybe you can combine some of those calculations into a fewer number of calculations. That would be absolutely fine if you can. The last thing I'd like to point out here about dates and times relates to the default date, time, number or measurement formats in whichever version of Windows that you're using. Now, this has long been not exactly a complicated issue, but maybe one that a lot of people had not quite got to grips with. If you have all default settings and you create your own workbooks, or you interact with people that are creating workbooks that are using the same settings as you, then this will very rarely be an issue. But sometimes when you interchange material involving Excel workbooks, if somebody has used a different date system, or have got their dates set up in a different way, then you may come across some problems. Now, I'm not going to go into this in detail now. There are 2 or 3 articles on Microsoft.com, including this one that applies to Excel 2013, that explains things like defaults for date formats, how dates are stored. There are actually 2 date storage systems. I mentioned the one based on 1st of January 1900. That's the default for the Windows version of Excel 2013. Traditionally, there were 2 systems, a 1900 system used on Windows and a 1904 system used on Macs. Both types of device can now use either system, but you need to make sure your default's set correctly, which it should be. Now, basically the place to go first of all to look at the default settings to do with dates and times is not Excel options, but you need to go into Control Panel and look at your regional settings. Now, bear in mind that the settings within regional settings from Control Panel apply across Windows unless they're superseded in a particular application. So you have format options here that are dependent on your locale, so things like what short date format looks like, what long date format looks like, short time, long time, which is the first day of the week, etc. And then if you click on additional settings here, the additional settings include things like, for dates, when a 2-digit year is entered, interpret it as a year between, and then there are settings there generally relating to how 2-digit years are handled. Now, as I say, don't forget these can be overwritten in individual applications, but it's important to understand what the defaults are set up on your machine in the operating system that you're using. I'm not going to go into that any further now. If you're having trouble, that's a good place to start, and it's also a good place to have a look now just to make sure that you know what your settings are at the moment. That's it for this section. I'll see you in the next one.